Okay, this is the set of slides and sort of mini lecture online here for the last of Plato's Republic, books 9 and 10 in particular. We'll start recapping the types of regimes in book 8, and then we will move on to talk about two more key concepts, and then I'll get you out of here. So thank you for listening to this, and if it's really horrible to have to listen to, then I'm sorry in advance. But first of all, this is just this opening slide. This is a quick shot of modern day Piraeus. This is the port that led back to Athens in the ancient times. As you can see today, the long walls are long gone, and so is the tributary and the canal leading back into modern Athens. Um, but I thought it might be nice to visualize that. It makes for a nice little opening picture. So there it is. Uh, Last class, we were sort of squeezing in this idea of revolution, that the three kinds of regimes that Socrates talks about, rule by one, rule by the few, and rule by the many, as represented by tyranny, timocracy or oligarchy, and democracy. These three regime types are the three possibilities. Either the one can rule, the few can rule, or the many can rule. And the reason for that is that there are no other alternatives. The all never rule because rule by all isn't rule. If everybody agrees to do something, then politics in command are not involved whatsoever because there's agreement sort of by definition. So in tyranny and in democracy, Socrates argues that there is, at their best, they are ruled by courage and spirit and honor, and honorable people are put in charge. But these honorable people are not rational people necessarily. They are just honorable people. They're spirited. So it's like being ruled by your spirit rather than ruled by your reason. And that doesn't really work for Socrates. He thinks that ultimately spirit by itself, just like reason by itself, can't defeat desire. They really have to have an alliance, and the right one has to be in charge. Reason has to tell honor what to do, not the other way around. So for Socrates, both of these regimes at their best are weak, and at their worst they are overwhelmed by desire, and then you get the sort of decayed forms. You get oligarchy, you get dictatorship out of tyranny, and these are just people who rule to line their own pockets at the expense of good rulership. And so those are obviously not great. Unfortunately, the only other real alternative is democracy. In democracy, Plato believes, through Socrates saying it, um, democracy has no good form. Democracy is just bad. Democracy is not even ruled by honor. There's no such thing as the honorable many in Socrates' eyes. The many are always about desire, about fulfilling their needs, about getting what they want. The democratization of education has led to education for the purpose of you getting a job so you can get stuff rather than becoming a master of subjects or a master of topics. Nobody ever talks about mastery anymore when it comes to education because you are all democratic in your soul, Socrates would say. You all are just want stuff. You're me, my, now. And that is permeated throughout democratic society. And it's why democratic society isn't stable and it isn't a particularly nice thing. You might say, well, what about the United States? Isn't this an exception? And somebody asked during class, does this mean that the United States is going to set up for a fall one day? And Socrates would say, yes. And you could think of some candidates as to how it might fall apart one day. Right? There's often lots of disputes between the many and the few, whether it's about wealth. The history of racism in the United States is particularly ugly, and the many don't ever really want to talk about the way that they treat minorities because they don't want to be told that they don't live in a society of liberty and justice for all. They want to be told that because they say it, that it's true. And when people confront them with it, then the people who confront them with it are whiners or crazy people or etc. But the amount of historical damage that's been done in highly discriminatory ways where the many have bullied the few in American society. The examples are numerous. And so Socrates would say, you're not the exception that you think that you are as a member of modern democratic society. So that's where we left off last time. Right now, where I want to pick up is with this question I left you with. And that's, well, what do we do with Plato's Republic if life is set up in such a way so that we are just forever caught in these endless cycles? Uh, Plato's response to this is that you need to found the republic in your heart. There's this quote here about that there's this pattern of the republic is laid up for the man who wants to see the city in himself. Doesn't make a difference whether it exists. In other words, Plato thinks that the just man follows the dictate of justice on a personal level, regardless of what anybody else thinks, right? They don't use the magic ring. They don't care if everyone else thinks that they're unjust. They know they're doing justice because they're interested more in keeping their soul in balance than they are in the opinions of other human beings. Plato's take on this spills over into the state as well. Living up to the laws of the best state in speech, Socrates says, is more important to the just man than living up to the laws that are arbitrarily laid down by one's own country. So, the true allegiance of the just man is to the best city in speech, the just city, the only city that deserves allegiance in Socrates' mind, not to the city that is constantly going through revolutions as if they are constantly fighting for power the way that the sort of brutes on the ship, in the ship metaphor, fight for control of the captain's position on the boat. So we found the republic in our heart. The best state in speech is the only state that deserves our allegiance. And we don't necessarily participate in our own domestic politics if the politics of the just state and speech would demand that we do something else. Again, this is dramatic irony, right? This describes Socrates' life. What Plato has done in giving this explanation is he's given an answer to the question asked of Socrates during his trial. Why didn't you participate in politics? And Socrates' answer was, of course, intentionally obnoxious. I was looking for someone smarter than me, and I never found them. But, sorry about the dog there. But the best state in speech, maybe this is what really commanded Socrates' loyalty. Maybe this is why he didn't participate in Athenian politics, in the Athenian democracy. He saw the greedy many up close, and he realized that they were not the people to whom he owed an allegiance. In other words, Plato is giving sort of the real defense for Socrates that he doesn't give for himself on this charge. So this is an interesting idea, right? We have to think about whether or not it matters that the best state in speech can exist. Just because it doesn't exist doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to live up to its standards and ideals. That's a very strong claim to sort of turn one's back on the things that they don't like in the state in a way that seems probably unreasonable to most of you. On the other hand, it seems like a particularly good foundation for the civil disobedience of Socrates, and also for in going future generations, the civil disobedience of Jesus of Nazareth, the civil disobedience of Martin Luther King Jr., the civil disobedience of Gandhi. All of them seem to have some sort of republic in their hearts that their sort of civic allegiance is to beyond the actual civic authorities that are standing there right in front of them. And this seems to be what makes them powerfully important figures in American history, or, well, in American history in Martin Luther King's case, but obviously in world history for all the other examples there. Okay, the myth of So where are we left off as we get to the end of this story? What most of us probably discover as the sort of narrator in this U2 song discovers is that what you thought was freedom just was greed. So what Socrates wants to do is try to leave his students, Glaucon and Edematus, with this sort of hope, this sort of enduring idea that it is possible to see love of wisdom, commitment to justice in the self, and to commitment to the just city in speech, that a life lived according to those principles is a life in which you don't have the leaky jar problem. Your life is always full because you're looking for the right things in your life and you can work to make sure that you have them. And once you have them, once you cultivate them, unlike consumer goods, you don't have to keep reacquiring and reacquiring them as if you're playing like Hungry Hungry Hippos or something like that. So this way that Socrates ties this story together is he tells this one last story, the myth of And so is this guy who is legally dead. They find him, he's legally dead for 11 days. When they put him on the funeral pyre about to light him, he woke up sort of like that guy at the end of The Lord of the Rings again. Gee, isn't it amazing how many times there's stuff in Lord of the Rings in this book? Well, anyway, I'll leave that alone. So he tells of this story. Says to his friends, you won't believe I had this sort of vision. I went to the afterworld while I was legally dead. And then just before they lit the fire, I got sent back and it was like, whoa. So his friend's like, well, what happened, And says, well, so I was down in the afterlife and I met all these famous Greeks. And it turns out that while you're down there in the afterworld, you get kind of reincarnated. You get sent back to the world. But everyone gets to sort of pick what they come back as. They have sort of like an NBA lottery where they draw lots to determine who gets what draft choice of what life they're going to be when they come back. And so all these Greek legends, they drew lots for what order they were going to pick their next life in. And people like Orpheus got very high draft picks. And Orpheus, if you know the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, after Orpheus loses Eurydice in the underworld, he is ripped apart by a bunch of angry Amazon women that he sort of ticks off. So crushed by love of a woman and ripped to death by a gang of women, Orpheus decides he wants to be a swan because swans are, at least in Greek view, I don't know if this is actually true, but there's this perception that they are asexual. So Orpheus says, that's just great for me. I'm going to be a swan. No women involved that way. I'll come out of an egg. I hatch rather than coming out of my mother's womb. Less maternal attachment. This is all fantastic. Sign me up for the swan. And Orpheus picks this. The reason that this gets highlighted is because Orpheus still's got issues, right? Other people in the story pick different lives, and they all pick and pick and pick. And the last pick in the draft comes to Odysseus. Odysseus is the hero of the Greek story, epic poem by Homer, the Odyssey. Odysseus is one of the heroes of the Trojan War who he kicks over during the height of his frenzy in the war. He kicks over the statue of Neptune in his temple and starts stealing stuff. And this is going to end up being bad news because when you got to sail back across Neptune's seas, Neptune decides he's going to totally mess with Odysseus for a really, really long time as means of revenge. Odysseus loved being favored and loved thinking that he was bigger than life itself. This was the only thing that was really flawed about Odysseus as a man. And Socrates says that in the myth of what happens with Odysseus is his time in the underworld has cured him of his love of honor. And because he had no other real flaws in his mental makeup, Odysseus was able to look at what was left to pick and say he would like to pick the life of a quiet man who minds his own business. And he goes on to say that if he'd had the very first pick amongst everyone in the underworld, he would have made the exact same choice so that he is happy. This is, of course, the life of Socrates, a quiet man who minds his own business. Although Socrates in some ways isn't quiet because he's always asking people pesky questions. But by and large, right, Socrates doesn't seek honor. He doesn't seek wealth. He doesn't seek fame. He minds his own business. When he gets invoked into other people's business, he ruins their day. But, what are you going to do? So Socrates says this myth of is a great story to tell people because it means that those people whose souls haven't been burdened by injustice are going to have a nice, long, healthy voyage in life on earth, and those who commit justice end up languishing in heaven. So, after all is said and done, we know that there are so many people out there who are not going to be able to be philosophers. They're not going to be able to be ruled by their reason. And because they're not, we're going to have to tell them one more story besides the myth of the metals. We're going to have to tell them this story that if you're bad, you get punished in hell for a really, really long time. And if you're good, you get a lot of rewards in this life and the next. It's not coincidental that this becomes one of the themes of Christianity much later. Christianity picks up on this part of Socratic argument and Platonic argument at the time. Notions of eternity, of immortality, of the Holy Trinity, many of these ideas can be traced back to the fact that some of the early Christian theologians are also classical Greek readers and classical Greek scholars, and they're interested in trying to combine what they know of Greek antiquity with these sort of Christian religious documents that they're trying to put together. Next, last thing to say about this, once again, sorry about the dog, is that Socrates thinks this story is false. He thinks that the story only is necessary because only the philosopher can really understand that developing one's skills, natural skills to live a happy life in this world is its own reward. He thinks that only the philosopher is capable of understanding and appreciating this, and everybody else just plain isn't. And so they need to be sort of conned into being happy, since their reason won't do it for them. But for the philosophers, Socrates says, look, you and I know that these stories are fairy tales, but the truth is that justice is its own reward, and it's really hard to see, and it requires a mental and emotional discipline to see it and to live by it that very few people can do. In review, talking about the Republic, we want to say give Alan Bloom the last word here, that the book is about the following. The just man can help others because he has taken care of himself. Justice is about what you do with yourself, the way that you give commands to your own self about what you do with your life. This is a very sort of narrowly focused view of justice from a modern perspective. It's a very challenging view of justice given the way that we normally talk and think about it in our society. But Socrates leaves us, as he wants to leave us always, with this sort of open-ended sense of wonder, not certain what we've learned exactly, but that we've learned something, that we've gotten something from this trip through reading this book, that we see things about our own society that maybe we didn't see before, that we worry about taking care of ourselves in ways that we weren't even aware of might have been problems in the first place before. Socrates helps us take our own journey through our own life, but he doesn't take it for us, and he doesn't tell us precisely how to find all of those answers to all of these deep questions that either bother us very much and cause us to work on them, or we put out of our mind and we spend a lot of time and effort trying to kind of cover them up and hide them so that they don't affect our lives, since we would be worried about them if we asked these questions to ourselves out loud. It has been said by philosophers, it is better to be a pig, it is better to be Socrates unsatisfied than a pig satisfied. In other words, that life is about asking these questions. Socrates himself will say, the unexamined life is not worth living. If you take that seriously, then what life really is on some level is one really big self-exam, the results of which no one else can tell you for yourself. You have to go on this personal journey, but in doing it, you also have to learn how to face up to the realities of the world and the realities of yourself. because your number one instinct is going to be to hide from this truth rather than embrace it, certainly rather than loving it as philosophers actually do. So that's Plato's Republic. Thank you for listening to this, and we will pick up next week. We'll start talking about Aristotle. Have a very good weekend. Bye bye.